Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our policy analyst hats to take a real deep dive into Europe's sovereign AI boom. And to do that, we're going to use Portugal's Amalia project as our ultimate test case. It's a fascinating way to understand a massive, fundamental shift happening right now in global technology. Okay, let's jump right into this.
To really grasp the stakes here, we have to start with the price tag. The Portuguese government has essentially invested 5.5 million euros of public funds into this Amalia project. And what's crucial to understand is that this isn't just a basic research grant, right? It's a national investment. And because it's public money, it inherently demands public accountability. It really forces us to ask, what exactly is a nation buying when it decides to build its own AI?
Well, to answer that, we need to get clear on what sovereign AI actually is. Basically, we're talking about national large language model initiatives that are explicitly funded to reduce reliance on US and Chinese frontier models. They do this by leveraging local data, local computing power, and local talent. And look, Amalia isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of this huge pan-European movement backed by over 100 million euros in public funding, sitting right alongside major models like Italy's Minerva, Germany's Aleph Alpha, and France's Mistral.
So, to properly evaluate this 5.5 million euro test case, we're going to follow a really strict audit structure today. We'll start with the sovereign AI boom, then define what fully open really means. After that, we'll tackle the native data dilemma, explore fluency versus knowledge, and finally zoom out to look at the pan-European strategies.
Okay, Section 1, the sovereign AI boom and evaluating Amalia's test case. Just for some context on the scale here, this project is a massive collaboration. It brings together 60 researchers across top Portuguese institutions, all working to serve roughly 450,000 academic users.
Let's move to Section 2, defining fully open and doing a quick transparency audit.
Now, the technical report calls Amalia a fully open source model, but let's actually unpack that for a second. If we look at the almost standard, which is pretty much the industry benchmark for true openness, a project has to publicly release its weights, its training data, its code, its training logs, and its exact methodology, the whole shebang. Now contrast that with the current Amalia operational release. Right now, only partial code is open. The weights, the data, the logs, they aren't public yet. They do have a final release planned for June 2026, but it definitely makes you wonder if claiming fully open right now is functionally accurate.
And you might be wondering, why are we being such sticklers about transparency? Well, it's absolutely crucial because openness is Europe's main competitive differentiator against closed frontier models from giants like OpenAI and Anthropic. Europe simply cannot outspend Silicon Valley big tech. Its strategic moat is operational transparency. So, if a sovereign model claims to be fully open, but is essentially operating as a closed or even just a partially open box, well, it structurally weakens the entire European AI agenda.
That brings us to Section 3, the native data dilemma, and asking, how much is enough?
To really wrap our heads around the architectural trade-offs being made here, let's compare Amalia in Portugal with Minerva in Italy. Minerva was trained entirely from scratch. They used a massive 500 billion tokens with roughly a 50-50 split of Italian and English data. They treated that sovereign language training as the absolute foundation. Amalia, on the other hand, took an existing multilingual base model and just added a continuation layer on top. In that process, only about 5.5% of its mid-training data was distinctly European Portuguese.
And this forces a major fundamental policy question onto the table for us. Does a 5.5% native data level actually justify a national investment? Think about it. If your data mixture features just 5.8 billion tokens from the Portuguese web archive, is that really enough native exposure to create a specialized national asset? Or are you just sprinkling a little local flavor on top of a generic model?
And the data actually reveals a pretty glaring structural vulnerability here. Look at this. Alibaba's Qwen 38B, which is a general-purpose Chinese model with zero specific emphasis on European Portuguese training, actually beats Amalia on most Portuguese tasks. That includes the ALBA benchmark, which is literally Amalia's own headline European Portuguese benchmark. When a general foreign model is outperforming a sovereign model on its own home turf, you absolutely have to reevaluate those training data strategies.
Which leads perfectly into Section 4, fluency versus deep knowledge. What exactly are we optimizing for here?
To highlight the core issue, I want to share this fantastic quote from analyst Duarte O. Carmo. He points out the gap in our current testing benchmarks by asking a really simple, everyday question. What's the most famous dessert served in Avaro? You see, it's one thing for an AI to translate words perfectly. It's a completely different thing for it to intrinsically know the local culture, the geography, and the daily life of a nation.
And the reality is, current sovereign AI benchmarks are heavily linguistic. They test grammar, syntax, and they check if the model uses European Portuguese instead of Brazilian Portuguese. And yes, obviously that is essential, but it's kind of like having a really well-spoken tourist. What a nation actually needs is intrinsic knowledge. We're talking deep, localized understanding of history, culture, geography, and politics. If your sovereign AI speaks your language beautifully, but doesn't know your country any better than a general US model does, you've totally missed the point of making a national investment.
But let's be fair. There is a hard physical limit we have to acknowledge. Portugal has a population of about 10 million people. There simply isn't an infinite amount of high-quality European Portuguese text data just floating around the internet to train on. This constraint, being a tiny country with a big language, means the traditional Silicon Valley playbook of just endlessly scaling up massive language models might literally be the wrong approach for sovereign nations. We might actually need smaller, deeply curated models, or even entirely different architectures, like retrieval-augmented generation, built directly on local knowledge bases.
Okay, finally, Section 5, Pan-European Strategies in the Playbook. Let's zoom out and look at how the lessons from Amalia's €5.5 million test case shape the broader strategic landscape for models across Europe, like OpenEuro LLM and Aleph Alpha.
Taking all these lessons together, we can clearly see the strategic roadmaps available to Europe. Option 1. Try to match US general capability, which, let's face it, is incredibly expensive and structurally very difficult. Option 2. Exceed on sovereignty and true operational openness. Option 3. Exceed on local, intrinsic country knowledge. Or Option 4. Exceed on application specialization, specifically in highly regulated local industries like healthcare and law.
So where does that leave our test case? Well, right now, Amalia is kind of straddling the fence. It sits somewhere between Option 2, sovereignty, and Option 3, local knowledge, but without fully committing to either. It claims openness, but as we saw, it isn't functionally open quite yet. It claims national specialization, but relies on just 5.5% native data and linguistic benchmarks rather than real knowledge-based ones. For this project to succeed, that final release in June 2026 is going to have to clearly stake its claim.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, not just for Portugal, but for the entire €100 million plus European sovereign AI movement. Will European AI be content as a fluent follower, basically just translating what frontier models already do? Or is it going to make the tough architectural and data choices to become a true sovereign local? As we've seen in this explainer, the strategic position of an entire continent really depends on how we answer that question. Thanks for joining me for this policy audit. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you in the next explainer.